So hello, my name's Alison Rose. I'm the current principal of Newnham College, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this inaugural Newnham College 150th anniversary event and the first in our anniversary four-part lecture series with Professor Dame Ottoline Leyser. I'm thrilled to welcome you all this evening from far and wide. One of the benefits of taking this event online is that we are able to involve members of the Newnham community from around the world. And we have people watching the lecture this evening in the US, India, Italy, Germany, Canada, and Singapore, to name just a few. We have as well some notable members of the Cambridge community joining us: Baroness Sonora O'Neill, Dame Patricia Hodgson, and Dame Carol Black, all my predecessors as principals of Newnham College, other college heads of house, Newnham Fellows, Cambridge City Councillors, members of Newnham staff, and alumni and students from around the world. And we're very honoured this evening to be joined by Professor Dame Ottoline Leyser, FRS, Newnham College 1983. Ottoline is one of the UK's leading scientists. She is Chief Executive of UK Research and Innovation, the UK's largest public research funder, with a combined budget of more than £8 billion a year. She was an undergraduate and postgraduate student at Newnham College and also held the Jenner Junior Research Fellowship. Her own research focuses on developmental biology, and she's Regius Professor of Botany at the University of Cambridge, a Fellow of the Royal Society, and appointed DBE in 2017 for services to plant science, science in society, and equality and diversity in science. Ottoline has a long-term interest in inclusiveness in science, particularly for parents in science, and her projects have included the Royal Society publication Mothers in Science, 64 Ways to Have It All, in 2008, revisited in 2017 as Parent, Carer, Scientist. This evening's lecture, The Two Cultures Revisited, will see Professor Dame Ottoline reopen one of the 20th century's major intellectual debates, placing it in the context of our own turbulent times. In 1959, the novelist and physicist C.P. Snow delivered his famous Rede lecture, The Two Cultures. He expressed concern about the divide between the arts and humanities and sciences. 3 years later, literary critic F.R. Leavis gave a scathing response, and the resulting controversy shaped British intellectual life of the 20th century. Ottoline will argue that a broader education, Snow's proposed solution, and I quote, will do little to change our propensity to erect unhelpful divisions, whether that is inside academia or outside. Instead, she proposes, we do need culture change, but we need a change to a culture that values difference and promotes diversity. We need to capture the benefits of disagreement and diverse experience and expertise to build better solutions. There will be time for a short question and answer at the end, so do please send in any questions via the question and answer channel at the bottom. I will be back at the end of the event to moderate that, but Dame Ottoline, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. It's really a huge pleasure to be here, at least virtually. I could say good evening, but clearly there are people from other time zones, so good time of day, whenever it happens to be for you. As Alison said, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the two cultures concept, which, as you will hear, I kind of grew up with and has lived with me in various guises ever since. And the way I now think about it, I think, has been very useful for me in helping to address some of the things that I really care about, again, as Alison mentioned, which are inclusiveness in general and the position of science in our society. So I'm really looking forward to sharing with you these ideas, and particularly looking forward to any questions and comments you might have about how useful you think this framing is, or not, as the case may be. So, it doesn't want to do that. Let's try that. Good. As has already been introduced, C.P. Snow as a Rede lecturer in 1959, set out this idea of the two cultures, the sciences and the humanities. And he set it out in a way that very much erected, I think, a barrier between them, or highlighted a barrier between them, and the lack of communication across that barrier. This is one of the quotes from the published version of the lecture. A good many times I've been present at gatherings of people who, by the standards of traditional culture, are thought highly educated and who have, with considerable gusto, been expressing their incredulity at the illiteracy of scientists. Once or twice, I have been provoked and have asked the company how many of them could describe the second law of thermodynamics. The response was cold and it was negative. Yet I was asking something which is the scientific equivalent of, have you read a work of Shakespeare? And this quote was something I grew up with, which, as you will see in a few slides' time, I grew up as a scientist in a family of historians and other arts-oriented people. And I felt this quite strongly in a lot of the interactions that I had with my family's wider circle of friends. And C.P. Snow, I have to say, was very even-handed in his criticism. It wasn't just that he was criticising people in the arts and humanities for not knowing any science. He was criticising people in the sciences for not knowing any arts and humanities. I confess that even I, who are fond of them, I like the them, and respect them, was a bit shaken. When one tried to probe for what books they had read, they would modestly confess, well, I tried a bit of Dickens, rather as though Dickens were an extraordinary, esoteric, tangled and dubiously rewarding writer. And, oops, as I've highlighted, for me, this was a very interesting narrative because I am the daughter of two medieval historians, Carl and Henrietta, shown here. And I show them in the convention for showing genetic pedigrees because my career has been in genetics, in developmental genetics. But we were a very close family who very much enjoyed debate and discussion of all sorts. And my older brother, Conrad, is also a medieval historian. And indeed, all three of these people have pursued large chunks of their career at the University of Oxford. My younger siblings, Crispin and Matilda, went into the arts in slightly different spheres. And I'm here stuck in the middle as someone who went very rapidly and early into the sciences and in particular into genetics. And I've got to say, in many ways, this was terribly useful for me because my teenage rebellion was doing sciences and going to Cambridge, whereas my poor brother, who read history at Oxford, had no such easy separation, no such easy route to distinguishing himself as an individual from my very distinguished historian parents. So at some level, I was kind of able to align or confuse the two cultures with the kind of generational divide. And as a result, though, I think kind of took it with me, this idea that there was some fundamental difference between our scientists and people in the humanities. And this was a kind of a problem somehow, and because it was such a kind of strong part somehow of my adolescence and growing up, that it took me a while to come to the conclusion that it was hokum, essentially. So let me take you through some of that reasoning. So, as I say, I grew up with this sciences, humanities divide. I grew up with it in the context of history. Here's the divide in this case. I've included Hadrian's Wall. C.P. Snow, I have to say, it wasn't that led him to be concerned about it. He was concerned about the fact that in government, in parliament, and in the civil service, the vast majority of people were educated in the humanities, whereas in industry, in the new industries growing up at the time, they were quite science-driven, and he was concerned about the inability of people in these two cultures, as he described them, to communicate across the divide, and the difficulties that would have for developing national policy for industry. And his solution to this was that we should specialize later in education, and that everybody should know the second law of thermodynamics, and everybody should read Dickens and Shakespeare, and this would fix the problem. It would be easy for these communities to talk to one another, everybody would be happy, and there would be no problems anymore. Now, I'm actually hugely in favour of later specialisation in the education system for a whole variety of reasons, but this is definitely not one of them. I don't think that this is in any sense a solution to the divisions that Snow identified. It's not a communication problem fundamentally. It's actually, I think, something rather deeper and more human than that. What I think is going on here is an absolutely classic example of the phenomenon that is very deeply in the way people think, which is in terms of kind of tribalism. It's an in-group, out-group phenomenon, where the sciences and the humanities have defined for themselves a different set of in-groups and out-groups. So in the sciences, we think we're wonderful, rigorous, useful people doing terrific things for humanity, and that people in the humanities are Luddites who don't know the laws of thermodynamics and how could one live in the world without such things. Whereas in the humanities, wonderful bastions of culture, there's this real, root to human values, I suppose, and we in the sciences are a load of Philistines who are just not in tune with cultural sensitivities. And it's as I say, a very classic in-group, out-group phenomenon, I think. And it could be any old groups. It could be Group A and Group B, who could be fighting with one another in particular ways. And this system of thinking about things, I think, is really very much one culture. It's a culture of tribalism, and has been very well articulated, I think, in social identity theory by Henri Tajfel. And his experiments, I think, that establish this are quite extraordinary. The rapidity with which groups of people, if you arbitrarily divide them into two groups, will form that group bond, and that group bond involves in-group favoritism. So you do all kinds of things to favor your group over and above the other group. So there's then out-group derogation. What comes with favoring your group, or is apparently closely linked to it, is actually negative emotions towards the out-group. Within group, there's a lot of social influence, and those things all feed back together to result in homogenization, both in the group and among the out-group, and then you have polarization and the whole thing embeds. Why do people do this? They do this because it apparently provides a sense of security. You're surrounded by people whom you know and love and who will support you in this group. And part of that, really unhelpfully, part of the bond that you share is not liking the other group. And this seems to be a really deeply embedded way in the way we work to reduce insecurity and fear of the unknown. And you see it everywhere. And I think fundamentally in academia, that two-culture issue is a manifestation of this problem. And that's why Snow's solution, in my opinion, is yet another manifestation of that problem. He's advocating that the solution is to be a polymath, and specialists are a lower grade of human. And obviously, everybody should be a polymath, and we should look down on people who were specialized in only one discipline, which is also, I think, not a very helpful way of thinking about things. I think we need to think instead about ways in which we can break through this very basic thing that people seem to do very quickly and quite arbitrarily to support their sense of security. How can we break through that? How can we actually get to the point where we don't build these walls, where we take the walls down, where we enjoy working with difference, working with groups of people who know different things and think different things and understand different things to the things that we think. And it's, I think, a real tragedy in many ways that in academia, in particular, we seem to suffer from this at least as badly as everybody else, despite the fact that the whole point about a university, I think, is to bring together a lot of people with different ideas and different experiences and different understanding in an environment that can promote that free and wonderful exchange of ideas. And of course, it's not the case that this doesn't happen. And one of the many wonderful things about the college system in Cambridge that I very much enjoyed and still enjoy in various contexts, but certainly, in my time at Newnham as an undergraduate and then a PhD student, that community of different people with different subject expertise and so on was and continues to be a joy. But nonetheless, somehow you see springing up all the time these divisions and these groups, and I find that a lot in my new job now. Also, where I'm representing all the disciplines, UK Research and Innovation brings together the research funding councils for all the disciplines, and also Innovate UK. So we're also funding right across all the sectors that do research and innovation, not just the academic sector, but also in standalone institutes and in businesses. And I spend a lot of time being told by people, what about my group? What about, obviously my group is somehow being disadvantaged in this system, and my group is suffering as opposed to that group. And I've heard it from all the groups, essentially. And it again, I feel in the context of research and innovation, which is all about sharing ideas, bashing ideas together that are different ideas, we need to be able to create environments where people are not threatened by difference, but welcome it. By, if somebody disagrees with you, you step in, you don't step back. So how can we take these walls down? And I started thinking about this, a long time ago now, not actually so much within sciences or within academia, between academia and the arts, between the sciences and the arts and humanities, but rather in the context of the relationship between science and everything else. So something that you might call public engagement with science. Again, to me, a large part of the problem is the entire conceptualization of the interaction between science and everything else is one of separation. There's science over here and scientists, and then there's the public over here. They're different people. They can't possibly talk to each other straightforwardly. You have to have, difficult and special mechanisms to allow information to pass across this wall. And I think it's not a tremendously helpful way of thinking about it. So why is that wall there? And it's there, I think, because we've built over many years now a kind of concept of what science is and who scientists are that seeks that lends itself to building this wall, that builds this wall higher every year, and it's built by people on both sides of it. It's not that scientists would love that wall to go and it's being kept there by people wanting to kind of keep science out, and it's not that the other way around either. It's not that scientists want to keep it's a mutual thing. And in many ways, I think another really classic example of this kind of in-group, out-group thinking. And from the point of view of the people on the science side of the wall, this conceptualization of what science is and who scientists are in particular is, I think, particularly problematic and corrosive, both to the relationship between science and society, but also to the culture inside science. And that concept of who a scientist is of somebody who is both somehow superhumanly clever. Science is really, really difficult, and you have to be really, really clever to be able to do science. And at the same time, it's also scientists are also sort of subhumanly robotic. We're back to that. One of the parts of the stereotype of the interaction between people in the sciences and the arts and humanities, that scientists are somehow not sensitive to human things. They're not kind of culturally aware. They're somehow driven by, you know, pure logic, and it's a somewhat inhuman kind of definition of what a scientist might be. Whereas, you know, normal people, everybody else, they're normal, they're people, they're not superhumanly clever, intelligent, but they're proper normal people. They're not subhumanly robotic. They've got all the lovely emotions and things that we associate with humanity. So why is it that scientists seem perfectly willing to accept this idea that they are superhumanly intelligent and subhumanly robotic? And maybe it's not surprising that you're quite keen on the idea of being superhumanly clever, but why would you like the idea that you're subhumanly robotic? I think it comes from this notion that science and the way science works is some kind of inexorable march to the truth. And it's a purely rational process driven, as I say, by cold, hard logic, and you will happily walk in a straight line to the answer using your superhuman intelligence, very precisely, rationally and logically applied. And if that's who you are, then obviously, you know, the general public won't understand what you're talking about, and they're totally irrational and obviously not as clever as you are. So it's going to be difficult to communicate with them. So you can sort of forget about that. And what this is, you know, when you lay it out like this at some level, is a desperate attempt to reduce what I would consider to be the kind of fundamental insecurity that there is in being a research scientist. If you're a research scientist, you are by definition stepping into the unknown. You have no idea what you're going to find out. It might be absolutely nothing. And it is terrifying. It's quite frightening to look that in the face and just not know what you're going to do, whether it'll work, what's going to happen. And so the idea that you're A, superhumanly intelligent, and B, on some kind of cold, hard march to the truth is very reassuring in a way. But at the same time, since you're definitely not superhumanly intelligent and you're definitely not on a cold march to the truth, as we will see, the thing that you've chosen to provide your security actually also like fundamentally undermines it, both to the detriment, I think, of your feeling of security as a person, your well-being, but also to the process of science, as I will try to set out. So this is, as I say, a kind of deeply embedded myth about what science is and how science works and who scientists are. And I think it's encapsulated by these two quotes. So this is a quote by Richard Dawkins: "Science is the study of what is true about the real world." I find this quite problematic for a whole variety of reasons, and I much prefer the Einstein quote: "If we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be called research, would it?" And this, to me, encapsulates exactly that point I was making, that research and science is inherently about stepping into the unknown. Of course, you don't know what you're doing, and that recognizing the insecurity of that activity and the braveness required for that activity, I think is really important to be able to do it well and to embrace it, and to build support mechanisms to help you do that. And the the idea that you are superhumanly intelligent and using your pure rational logic to proceed is actually extraordinarily unhelpful and undermining to the things that you need to allow yourself to do that well. So it's very beguiling to imagine that science is this cold hard march to the truth. But if you're doing it, what everybody experiences is nothing like that. It's much more this kind of random wandering about process where things happen unexpectedly, you hit dead ends all the time, and maybe eventually you find something wonderful. But again, by definition, it's not what you're expecting. And that's partly that, that's why it's so exciting, is precisely because you're on this kind of journey into the unknown, this exploration of unknown space, but it doesn't map in any way onto the way that your lived experience of what's going on. And that is really difficult for people, I think. And it adds to the pressure that a lot of people feel under in the research system, because they're living, within this kind of cognitive dissonance between what they think they're doing and what they're actually doing, and not helped even more by the fact that when you come to write up your lovely journey to the pineapple, because you have to write it as a linear narrative in order for it to be understood by people, it somehow kind of reinforces for you the idea that it ought to have been a linear narrative, and if it wasn't, then a linear process, then there's some problem. So this juxtaposition of the kind of idealized version of science and what people actually experience, I think, is a problem. And if we were clearer, I think, about how science works, what science is what the point is, which is this journey into the unknown, which we have managed to support by at least codifying the process in a way that's useful, then I think we might be able to step out of this kind of superhuman robot idea about what science is. So, what is it? You make some observations, you become curious, a very basic human emotion, or you want to solve a problem, you want to make things better, another very basic thing. You wander around in the dark for a bit, you kind of try and figure out how you might be able to fix it. You come up with an idea, you formulate it into something you might want to call a hypothesis, which you devise some way to test. And then you can either reject that hypothesis or fail to reject it. And in either case, that can lead you to wandering around in the dark a bit more and trying to figure out a further test of the hypothesis or new hypothesis, and then you iterate. So what's going on when you're doing science is not your kind of science in-group security blanket. It's not I'm superhumanly clever. It's actually, the whole process of science is about consistently and repeatedly being wrong. And it's about looking at an unknown thing in the distance and trying to figure out what it's about. This notion of superhuman intelligence is so far from what you experience when you're doing it that I think it's very profoundly unsettling. You are definitely not on an inexorable path to something you might want to call the truth. I think what the process of science is much more accurately described as it's a model building process. It's about building models of the world that have both explanatory and predictive power. And a lot of people are very reluctant to give up this idea that they're on a march to the capital T truth, and find it somehow diluting to imagine you're building models with explanatory and predictive power. But the models we have extraordinary explanatory and predictive power and have done the most amazing things for us as societies. And the idea that this is somehow lesser than some absolute truth, I think, is incredibly unhelpful. I think we need to embrace the fact that we have done this amazing job of building these models with very high levels of explanatory and predictive power. And that will help, I think, embed the notion of progress and positive step forward in a context where anything could happen. You're doing the research, you're endlessly hitting walls, having to go round, having to think of alternatives. And what that means is essentially you're making stuff up as you go along. Of course, logic comes into it. Of course, it's an exciting and rational kind of intellectual process, but it is also about creativity and imagination. And again, people kind of know that. They know that inspiration is important, and having that more clearly articulated, I think, is very helpful. And then if you can get into that kind of position where you're thinking about it in that much more kind of nuanced way, then you get to the point where other people going with you into the unknown with their ideas and their ways of thinking about it, that becomes a really positive element. That difference is a kind of bet hedging strategy, and it's a good thing. And how can we combine our different skills and ideas and ways of thinking about this to make more progress together? And I find I've always found that a really exciting and inspirational part of being in the system. And another key reason why we need to shift away from the idea that being wrong or being challenged is a problem in academia in general and in sciences in particular. We've got this wonderful method, which is a kind of codified thought marshalling method that actually anybody can do. That's the other thing. It's a very basic human activity. Children do it. You watch your 2-year-old, it's child's play, exploring the world in that way. And you definitely don't have to be superhumanly intelligent, and you definitely don't have to be a robot. And it requires all those incredibly human things, which is what you are feeling when you're doing it. It requires creativity and imagination and inspiration. Being wrong is a good thing. It's how you make progress. And building these models with increasing explanatory and predictive power it feels creative and positive, and that progress is happening, whereas imagining you're after some golden prize truth, it's never, it's always too far away and always inaccessible, because that's not really what's happening. And I to me, as I say, the myth about what science is has embedded itself in the way research culture happens. We think we can objectively decide how good a scientist is, how big is yours, how long is your publication list, how big is your grant check, and that's somehow an accurate measure, when really it is an inherently collaborative process that works better when you're sharing ideas and views. And we need to think of it as a collective endeavor, where we are supporting one another to do this quite scary thing of going into the unknown. So a much better security blanket than your Einstein is that you are working collectively and collaboratively to build these powerful models, that being wrong and disagreeing with someone is a really good thing, and that you can enjoy your creativity and curiosity and sharing all of those things with others in a really constructive and supportive way. And it's that kind of approach to thinking about science and scientists that I think for scientists should help you to take down that incredibly unhelpful wall, because discussions with all kinds of people, whoever they may be, including people with no expertise in your area, including your colleagues in college from the arts and humanities, having those discussions is actually a really useful and valuable contribution to helping you to move forward, because people think about things in different ways, and that's really helpful. So we dismantled, I hope, this problem for scientists. We just very quickly touch on what that means for people on the other side of the wall, for that everybody else is. I think that that kind of Einstein image is people like it because on the one hand, it means they just don't have to think about it. It's nothing to do with them. It's only for clever people. So we can just park that whole stuff over there. It's fine. And it's also kind of reassuring that these superhumanly intelligent people are fixing all your problems for you. And people quite like that idea, but then they're also a little bit scared because these people are not only superhumanly intelligent and fixing all the problems for you, but also they are subhumanly robotic and they're changing the world really quickly. And anyhow, if they're so clever, how come they're wrong and disagree with one another? And it's that conflict is worrying for people, and it undermines I think, the confidence people have in the process. And beyond that, the notion that science as a process, as a way that you can understand the world, is the domain of these peculiar boffins, and you don't have to engage with it and it's nothing to do with you, actually takes away from people, I think, some really valuable tools and agency and just confidence, yes, that you yourself have the power to make your life better through that kind of investigative process. Even, that's not to do with curing cancer in your garage. It's to do with solving the problems you encounter in your everyday life, because the tools of thinking about it, that kind of collaborative thought marshalling process is incredibly broadly applicable. And it's not by any means unique to science. I'm not claiming that is a kind of, and quite the opposite. I'm claiming that it's a basic human thing that everybody does. But somehow or other, the idea that problem solving or difficult is for those people to do, I think, is disempowering. And so giving it back to people is empowering, gives them agency. And that without that, it's much easier for people to fall in with a different kind of in-group, to believe whoever people are being telling them that they're right and all of those kinds of things. So what I think is that if you shift the concept of what science is into the place that I've described it, then it becomes something that anyone can do and anyone can engage with, because you can recognize this process of making some observations and becoming curious in your everyday life. It's normal. It's, as I say, it's child's play. It's what you watch your toddler doing at home. And in that normality, it is very empowering, and it opens the opportunity for a much wider range of people to participate. So if you kind of take away this everyone else security blanket, it looks like this. Science is actually, that approach to problem solving is a method I use all the time. It's perfectly normal. Scientists are people, we're all people, it's all just fine. I have a set of tools that I can use to tackle problems in my life, and I don't need to believe whoever else. This is a little bit out of date now. I'll have to come up with a different decision that people could make in a more in a way that they felt more personally empowered to make that decision, rather than needing to be given a sort of sense of security by someone else. And I think actually it's this shift in the concept of what science is, and it's weaving much more broadly across society, that will have at least as profound an impact on society and how society can work together in that collaborative way to solve collective problems, than the way that we usually talk about science saving the world, which is its extraordinary ability to build these models with explanatory and predictive power that allow us to navigate uncertainty. And I think now is a really interesting time to be thinking about this. And because we're living in a pandemic, and in the UK, we've watched on the television night after night the government chief scientific advisor standing up and explaining what's going on. And I think it has revealed some of these truths about science, which I hope will allow us to move forward with thinking about where science fits in our society. Scientists are people. They're not strange boffins. They pop up on the TV and look like people. people have watched the evidence rolling in and the change in advice that's happened as a result of that evidence. It's very apparent that the science on its own doesn't tell you what to do. It's not enough. It helps you to navigate uncertainty, but the choices you make have to involve a much wider range of things. And that in doing that, in allowing you to navigate this really uncertain time, there are a lot of different skills and contributions that we need to take advantage of that information. Now, of course, this slide is rather a rosy picture of how we might emerge as a society, having lived through this experience, because science has also been a kind of political football in all this, and all of these statements I made have been fed into the very popular narrative that we still have, which is very in-group, out-group and polemic, so that two people disagreeing or changing your mind is pitched as a shambles, when in this context of navigating uncertainty, changing your mind is the right thing to do when new evidence arrives. So I think I'm trying to push the narrative about how we've got through the pandemic into this much more nuanced kind of framing, away from a kind of blame, finger pointing that I think is in danger of ensuing as soon as we reach some level of stability. I think this is really important. This is something I think we need to try to push for, is yes, to learn the lessons of what we did well and what we did badly, but yes, also to emerge with a better understanding of how science can help us to navigate uncertainty, but will never allow us to eliminate it. And we need to think more carefully about how collectively we make decisions. And that process is fundamentally about this process of taking down walls, having engaged discussions with multiple people with different views, to make collectively and collaboratively the best decision. And so if I were going to be pitching two cultures, the two cultures would be this very dominant in-group, out-group narrative that we see everywhere in our culture and in our society. And I would like to pitch that against the kind of society I would like to live in and the kind of place I would like to work in, which is a much more inclusive, difference welcoming, open-minded society in which we can work together collaboratively to solve the problems that we're facing, and how we can flip out of our current culture, which is very inherently erecting of walls and divisions, into that more inclusive way of thinking about things is something I'm extremely interested in doing at various kind of levels in my life. And I think, just to end, you can almost capture that narrative or that framing in the Newnham banner, better is wisdom than weapons of war. And I would maybe replace that with some kind of collaboration versus division argument. And with that, I would like to stop and thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take questions, keen to take questions.
Thank you very much, Ottoline. I'm afraid I can't simulate the thundering round of applause that I would have got in real life, but please take that as read.
Cultures.
Thank you. Well, that's a very good place to end, because certainly one of the things I've noted down from the many little gems was discussions with all kinds of people will be useful, especially if they disagree with me. So, Dame Ottoline, thank you so much for sharing with us so generously and honestly. There's lots of things to think about. Ottoline has allowed us to record this, so hopefully before too long it'll be on the website so people can come back and just refresh and think through some of those very interesting, thought-provoking, and as you can tell from the way she's described it, personally lived through and felt. This isn't just sort of theoretical, this is born from the fruit of much experience in many walks of life. So thank you very much. Thank you so much, everybody. We were up to 304 people listening, so that's absolutely fantastic. Don't forget the next lecture on the 30th of April, and look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you again, Ottoline, and look forward to saying thank you in person with a dinner at some point when we're able to do those. But thank you very much, and a huge round of applause from us all. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.